Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I have a topic I want to dive into around 7 recovery killers that will make body comp change harder after 30. First, before I dive into that, I just want to go over a way you can help support the podcast. Sorry, not support the podcast, but help you out is checking out my free body recomp checklist. So that will go over the 2 types of body recomp, what body recomp is, the importance of focusing on body comp, and then 10 things you need to ensure that you see a body recomp. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. So make sure you go and check that out. So if you're watching on YouTube, I have a nice little stain here on my shirt from my son Colby. He's at that stage where he likes to eat, gets a bunch of food all over his mouth, and then he'll rest his head on your shoulder and stuff. And so you never know you're going to have food on you when you have children that are under 2 years old. It's always fun there. Anyway, so let's dive into today's episode. So like I said, I want to talk about 7 recovery killers that will make body comp change harder after 30. I think this is a good topic. I just was scrolling through social media and saw some things. I was like, you know what? That's a good post. Definitely, because I don't think people are aware of what may cause some under recovery. And then when we're under recovered, what is that going to do? I think when recovery is low, and again, especially for those over 30, because when we're in our 20s, we're resilient. We can bounce back. Lower things that are going to impact your recovery, or you can just bounce back. You can do more of them, and it's really not going to do much to you. And so I think that is definitely something that gets ingrained in our head. And then you take the kind of and it becomes habit. And then you take maybe the person that is either been working out for a while or maybe trying to get back in shape in their 30s after or later in their life after maybe being an athlete or doing things where, again, in your teens and 20s, you could literally do whatever you wanted. You could eat whatever you wanted, as much as you wanted, get as little sleep as possible, party, and you'd be good to go, right? And then you also have this like, hey, you need to work super hard all the time. And so again, that kind of becomes ingrained but as we get over 30, like we have more things, we're less resilient in general. We just can't bounce back like we used to. There's just more wear and tear on the body. And again, there's going to be some genetic difference here for some people. Some people are going to be able to handle more, some people less. We also have more things going on in our life as well too, right? More things from a mental perspective, right? You have a job, other social obligations, a family to take care of. There's just a lot more on our plate. And again, you combine that with now we're a bit less resilient in general to anything like circadian disruption, thing like that. We just have a little bit less resilience as we get older there. But when recovery is low, everything's just going to get tougher, right? Like fat loss is going to be tougher, muscle gain is going to be tougher, performance isn't going to be as good. And also when recovery is lower, adherence and willpower is going to be lower. So that means that we're going to be less likely to make choices that are in line with our long-term self there. So I'll go over what are some things that will tell you that your recovery is low. So we are going to wrap up with that. But again, just think of this as more so it's not like if you do one thing, it's going to completely derail you. But the more that you have on this list, there's a good chance you're going to be under recovered. And we need to make sure that we focus on that to make sure that our recovery is back in a good spot. And we don't just continually try to push and push. Because again, you get to this point to where now you're under recovered, your body's more in kind of survival mode at that point. And so you keep piling things on like harder training, other things, and you just leads to you being burnt out, putting in a lot of work and spinning your wheels, right? Because our body's in this survival state and not necessarily in a state where it wants to adapt from like a body composition standpoint and even performance. So again, we need to make sure this is on check. And again, just because something maybe hurts recovery or is a negative from a recovery standpoint doesn't necessarily make it bad, right? Like so some things that we'll talk about are going to be like training volume, calorie deficits, conditioning work. In order to push those things and to change our body comp, like we are going to have to push our body, and fatigue is going to be a byproduct of those things. But they do come with a cost. And really what I want to hammer home today for anybody listening is going to be, again, the more of these you have, we need to start to pay attention to our recovery, and maybe we need to pull other recovery killers down, which I'm about to explain here. And again, the more you have, the more that you're going to want to work on one of these things the more you have, right? And I think as I go through these, it will start to make sense. Okay, so number one from the thing that's going to decrease your recovery is going to be high training volumes and productive training. Okay, so again, this isn't bad, but they do increase your recovery demands. Again, as we go through more and more things on this list, we have to understand that the more training we do, the more intense it is, that is going to be a drain on recovery. And so the more work you do, the more dialed in the rest of this list needs to be. So the rest of the things. And that's the thing, like if we have training that isn't going to cause a decrease in recovery, then you're likely not going to see any adaptations. I think any sort of exercise is going to be good. Like we need to do it. Things like just doing some light walking where your heart rate doesn't really get up at all. Again, that's going to be good for your overall health. health. But if we're looking at, hey, I want to improve my performance or I want to improve my body composition, I want to build more muscle, that's not going to be a thing it doesn't, right? So it doesn't drain recovery. It could potentially, I know if you do things like it probably isn't necessarily adding to recovery, but it can be helpful from like a blood flow perspective. And again, there's other benefits of doing something like walking. But again, if something doesn't decrease your recovery from a training perspective, you're probably not going to be seeing any body comp changes or performance increases, right? Again, hard training, fatigue, and decreasing your recovery is going to be a byproduct of hard training, but it's all about how we balance it. And it's all about how we manage it with everything else on this list as well too. So again, first thing is going to be high training volumes. And think of this as the more intense it is. So the closer to failure you get, and the more you do, the more it's going to start to add up. So from a hypertrophy perspective, what are going to be some things that are really going to decrease recovery? Well, again, high training volume. So you're doing a lot of volume on something, right? Pushing close to failure, again, likely going to come in a little bit of a higher fatigue cost. So you can start to see now where we have to start to be smart with how much training we can do, how much volume, and then how intense it is. And then again, if now you're combining more recovery, you can get away with you're gonna be doing less essentially at that point. That's gonna end up being the bottleneck to you doing more. So that's like the thing where it's like when it comes to hypertrophy training, we probably want to try and get in the highest quality, but also the most that we can do. But for most people, the bottleneck becomes a time or a recovery bottleneck, right? Just because again, some of these things on this list are not good. And again, from a time perspective, most people can't dedicate hours to being into the gym each and every day, whereas a professional bodybuilder certainly can there. But even so, from a hypertrophy perspective, those will be some things that will add fatigue and decrease recovery. Certain exercises that are very heavy in like the lengthened position, those can add a little bit more fatigue. So the more you do, the more fatiguing it's going to be. Probably doing higher rep sets will be a bit more fatiguing compared to lower rep sets, just because again, you're doing more, right? So those would be a few things that would be there. And then obviously like the main one being training volume and intensity of training. And then high training volumes are also, when you think about endurance training, so you're someone who does your training for a marathon, that's going to come at a huge recovery cost because you're doing such high training volumes, right? From a cardio perspective. So if we combine, hey, I'm also going to do some cardio and some weight training, like what this means is we can certainly do that. We have to be smarter with our intensity, how much we do, and again, recovery outside of this. So again, we can't get away from productive. If we want to grow, we want to build more muscle, we need to have productive training, and that productive training is going to come with a recovery cost. So in this sense, that's a good thing. But too much with poor recovery is when we can start to run into some potential issues there. So number two is going to be poor diet quality. So this doesn't just include calories, right? I think a lot of people hear this and they think, oh, we just need to eat enough calories, or I need to eat surplus and that's going to help with my recovery. Yes and no. I think your caloric balance is going to be important. Being in a deficit can lower recovery overall on the body, but there's some ways we can go about it. For some people, being in a deficit may be a net positive from a recovery standpoint, especially if you're high body fat levels and you reduce that body fat, that's probably going to help with recovery. But again, it's not just a calories thing. That is part of the equation, but we'll talk about what else matters here. So what are some things that are going to hurt recovery? Too many ultra processed foods relative to minimally processed food / unprocessed foods, right? So again, if we start to get that ratio too high to where we're eating too many ultra processed foods, that's probably going to be a drain on recovery, right? Again, we'll talk about why that may be here from like a micronutrient deficiency, but again, too high of that compared to whole unprocessed, minimally processed foods on there. Low omega-3 intake, so low EPA, DHA on there, low vitamin D, magnesium, B vitamins, right? So these are some minerals and these are all vitamins, magnesium's a mineral. These are all vitamins and minerals that we want to have in our diet, right? These are ones that are usually typically lacking for people. And if we're obviously low in that, that is going to hurt recovery. Your body's just not going to be as good. It's not going to have the nutrition that it needs to be at its best. Low fibers. We're not getting in enough fiber. That could cause some issues from a gut health perspective, which then can lower recovery, right? So we want to make sure we also get some fiber in as well too. And being very low fiber can impact that. And then like macro imbalance. So when I say that, this is usually in like long periods of time. So you could think of a macro imbalance as you're not getting in enough protein. That's going to hurt recovery. You could think of a macro imbalance as like maybe you're someone who does like super high fat, low carb diet. Again, in the short term, you're probably fine, but in the long term, you're going to start to see decreases in your recovery. And then carbohydrates can also be helpful from a recovery standpoint, right? So if we are always low on carbohydrates and we also have a high training load, that's going to lower our recovery, right? So we want to have balanced macros. And when I say balance, we're more trying to balance it throughout the entire year. If you were to zoom out and to average it out, not necessarily, hey, if you go low carb for a short amount of time, that's going to hurt recovery. But if you do that for years on end, now it's probably going to start to hurt recovery. Then we have chronic deficit plus micronutrient deficit. Okay. This is where we're talking about calories plus micronutrients. The deficit will start to be a drain on the body. Like I said, there's situations where, when you're at moderate to high body fat levels, initially that's probably going to be a positive from a recovery standpoint. You still have a little bit of a low caloric intake that could impact recovery slightly, especially if you have high training volumes. So yeah, we have that. But the keys being that micronutrient deficiency in a deficit. And then obviously the larger the deficit, the longer it is, the leaner you get, the more it's going to start to be a drain on your recovery. Right? You take somebody with high body fat levels, they're not in a super aggressive deficit, but they're in a moderate to high deficit. But we also are taking care of our micronutrients, right? We have a good balanced diet. You're balancing the ultra processed to the minimally unprocessed foods. That person's their recovery should be good to go for a while. Now, you take someone who's in a super aggressive diet, they're leaner, they also are not getting in the they need to be that they have, plus a high training volume. Now that's going to start to be a drain on recovery as well, too, there, right? So again, it is very context dependent on where you're at there. But generally speaking, if you have a high training load, and you have a fat loss diet, it's probably going to start to lean more on the drain on recovery versus being positive. But there's still some things that we can do to make sure we offset that. A chronic surplus plus a micronutrient deficit, again, is going to be a drain on the body. Again, this is all based on somebody's current body fat levels, right? Somebody that has higher body fat levels and they're at a micronutrient deficit, which that's probably most people that aren't focused on their nutrition are going to be in either one of those typically, right? It's like, yeah, people are eating in a surplus, which is for some people better than being in a deficit, depending on where you're at. But typically it's going to be a lot of quote unquote empty calories where you also are going to be in a micronutrient deficit in that surplus, right? So that's where it can become problematic at that point. Now you take someone who's on the leaner side, they've been fat loss dieting for a while, a chronic surplus, a small surplus could be something that is going to be beneficial from a recovery standpoint for the short term, right? And if you also are making sure that you get your micronutrients in check and you have a good balanced diet, it's probably going to be a net positive for a period of time on your recovery versus it being a drain. Now, again, the larger the deficit, the longer you're in that the larger the surplus, the longer you're in that surplus, and the more holes you have in terms of your micronutrition, the more it's going to start to be a drain on your body. So the whole on this though is having a good quality diet as a baseline is going to help you. It's going to help you from a recovery standpoint. And then in terms of actual calories, it is going to depend on where you're at combined with the diet quality there. So number 3 is going to be poor circadian rhythm health. So again, nothing's going to zap your recovery more than your circadian rhythm being out of line. We can take this from a sleep perspective, but also just how efficiently and effectively your body is going to run. Some things that are going to impact your circadian rhythm are going to be lack of sunlight, too much blue light or bright light at night, especially right before bed, poor eating patterns. So like large meals right before bed, maybe like fasting all day and then saving all your calories for late at night, super extended fasts. I guess that would go into the calorie balance talk. Could be could end up being a stressor on the body, but we're looking at poor eating patterns essentially here. Large meals right before bed, and then trying to save all your calories for like right before bed. High stress at night, so like doing something super stressful right before bed. Again, that's going to impact your circadian rhythm. Inconsistent sleep and wake time, so we're all over the place in terms of when we go to sleep and when we wake up. Again, you don't have to be exactly at the same time each night that you go to bed and wake up in the morning, but again, we don't want that to vary too much too often. And then high stimulant use throughout the day and later into the night. A lot of alcohol, like again, alcohol at night, alcohol close to bed, and then and then even like drug use right before bed, right? So like a common one is like THC, for example, where some people will use THC to help them fall asleep and to get sleep. My thought on that is you need to see how you feel with that, because I feel like the more you take right before bed, again, it may help you get, same thing with alcohol, it may sedate you a little bit, but it's likely going to impact your sleep quality. I know anytime I've taken a gummy or THC too close to bed, I wake up and I feel like super groggy the next day. So if I'm going to have it, it's going to be as far away from sleep as possible there within reason, right? Because you can't be taking a gummy at 10 a.m. all the time. And it's not going to be good for you either. So just with anything, it's like anything good like that we enjoy, we unfortunately have to moderate it and we have to watch when we take it as well too. So again, nothing is going to zap recovery more than a poor circadian rhythm health, right? This to me is where most people have some room for improvement overall. Then we have alcohol, right? Again, another huge drain on recovery. So even 1 to 2 drinks can bump up resting heart rate and drop HRV, right? The big issue is going to be disrupted sleep, as I just talked about. And then you're going to have that high resting heart rate the next day, which means you're going to have poor recovery. It essentially means your body is working harder to do less. So again, that's going to be a drain on your recovery. And alcohol is going to do that, right? Even now for me, if I have 1 drink, like I notice the next day, my resting heart rate is going to be a bit higher. And again, the closer I get that to bed, the more that's going to be the case. I had a client on his daily form was kind of like, hey, my resting heart rate's a lot higher today. I only had a couple drinks. I'm like, yeah, it's going to do that to you, right? And so now you're in the state where, now we need to, what a lot of people do is now heart rate's high the next day. They either make it worse by they're hungry, they maybe crave tasty food, they try and really push training, also slightly dehydrated, which is going to increase your resting heart rate. So again, all these things start to stack up in this situation. But again, nothing is going to wreck your recovery more than alcohol, right? So we do need to be careful with that. Again, if you're someone who's in a deficit, a large deficit, you have a high training volume, maybe your circadian rhythm isn't great, and then you add on alcohol on top of it, all these things are going to start to add there. So again, alcohol is going to be a huge drain on recovery. So my thought on alcohol is I enjoy some from time to time, but if your health and body composition and training performance is important to you, like you really unfortunately have to moderate it as much as you can there. And look, if you have some event where you really want to enjoy and you don't care, then hey, that's fine. Just understand the trade-off. And then we just need to have strategies in place to help manage that as best as possible. But I probably would not have a training session the next day that you really want to perform well in if you're going to be having before. But again, this is huge on recovery. I know, like I remember after some days in college, after having a good amount of alcohol, I would wake up and my heart would just be racing super, super fast. And I never really understood what was going on. But now looking back, I'm okay. My resting heart rate was just through the roof and my body was under recovered and was working super hard there. Number 5 is going to be high stress load. So psychological stress and physical stress, they all add together. So high life stress plus high training load plus poor sleep is going to be a fast track to poor recovery. So again, high psychological stress, again, whether you can a lot of times we can't control it. We can't control things that happen to us, but we have to understand that's going to be a drain on recovery. Okay. So again, a lot of this is awareness too. Something like alcohol, we have the choice to do, but something like physical or psychological stress from like something happened at work, something happened in a relationship, something happened in your day, financial stress, whatever it is. It's like, can't necessarily not have those impact you. It's going to impact you the way it impacts you, but now we just need to understand, okay, so, now I have a lot of psychological stress that's going to decrease my recovery. Maybe now I need to focus a bit more on better nutrition. Maybe I need to reduce my training output for a little bit, right? Because or maybe I need to focus on circadian rhythm health a little bit more, right? Because as these things start to add up, it can become problematic. So psychological stress is high. You also are been in a deficit. It's like, okay, now's maybe the time where I'm not going to push the alcohol intake because I know that's going to be another drain on recovery, right? So a lot of this is just checks and balances of all this. Like, hey, this is a drain. Now I need to focus a bit more on this to make sure now I have that charge, right? To make sure that I can recharge. Number 6 is a lack of movement. I talked about too much training can hurt recovery, but too little movement also hurts recovery, right? Like if we're not active, we're not moving, that's not going to be good. That's going to hurt your recovery. We do need to be active and we do need to move. And I bring this up because, like, okay, hey, I have high stress. I drink alcohol. Circadian rhythm's not great. I'm just not going to move and just recover and not do anything. We still probably want to do something, but it just we need to lower the intensity of what we're doing. We still want to get some movement in, but it probably has to be a bit more on the restorative side versus pushing it and trying to set a PR. So again, a lack of movement is going to hurt recovery as well too. So we need to make sure we move enough. And then the final one's going to be poor hydration. So again, simple but overlooked. A lot of people will hear this and just gloss over it, but it is overlooked and it is going to, one, reduce performance, it's going to slow recovery, and it can raise our stress response. So now, we're going to have higher psychological stress to any sort of stressor that we have from our day-to-day there. It's also not going to be good from a performance standpoint. And again, it is just generally going to slow your recovery, right? If we're not well hydrated. So again, we don't necessarily need to overhydrate, but we just need to make sure we hydrate enough. You look at your urine color there, make sure you're sipping on some fluids throughout the day. And again, you're not just drinking coffee and alcohol, right? So again, hydration is going to be another baseline thing here that's going to help us with all this. If we don't have it in check, again, now it can be a drain on recovery, but it can be like a synergistic effect with everything as well too, if that's off on there. So those are going to be the main things that are going to drive down recovery. So again, we already know some of the things you need to have. Let's say you're in a fat loss push. You still want to have productive training, which is going to be a drain. And then we know that a deficit up until at a certain point starts to become a drain on your recovery. But those are things that if we want to change our body, we need to have. So then we need to be more smart about everything else we do. But then also think if you do have a high training load, now it's like, hey, I need to focus on my nutrition a bit more. And I need to focus on my recovery a bit more because now I'll be able to get more out of my training if my recovery is there. Whereas if you have a high training load and your recovery is not there, you're going to be working hard and now you're going to put yourself at a higher risk of burnout, injury, and just spinning your wheels there. And I feel like if you get to the point to where you do more, but everything is not at what you're capable of. And so everything's just watered down at that point. So how do we know recovery is low? So first, your resting heart rate is higher than your normal baseline, or I think above 60 in general. I think that means that we have some wiggle room to work on something from a recovery standpoint. Could add in a lack of cardiovascular fitness as a thing that's going to hurt recovery. I didn't really put that in there, but that is a thing that you could potentially add in. So it could be a thing where if you don't have that, that can be something that drives it down. But maybe it's your circadian rhythm, maybe it's stimulant use, maybe it's stress management. We need to do something to help manage our stress. But again, if it's higher than 60, again, something I would look at there. But then also if it's higher than your baseline. So you take your average and you need a couple weeks to look at this, and it's, let's say it's around 51. Some days it's at 50, some days it's at 49, some days it's at 53. Once you start to get away from that and you start to see these things where it's like, hey, it's at 57, hey, it's at 60, like those are signs that, hey, we're starting to get under recovered there. It's going to be a bit slower. So in terms of being able to measure it, like it's going to show up a little bit later. So it's just one thing that we can use. HRV is consistently lower than normal. So again, consistently lower than normal, not just one. If it's one day, I'm not overly concerned. It's, hey, where's it at over multiple days? What is that relative to where your typical base is with that? With HRV, it is a good metric if you can get it correctly. I think Aura does a pretty good job. But other than that, like your Garmin, okay, Apple Watch, not good. Like I don't really see any use of the Apple Watch. At that point, you would want some sort of, I actually don't have anything specific that you could use, but probably some sort of heart rate monitor strap that you put around your like chest would be good. And then there's certain apps that you can get that will help decipher that information. But you would need to take a couple minutes in your day at the start of your day to take that measurement versus how a lot of these do. They just randomly take it throughout the day. Then we would want our daily subjective mood and energy. Okay, so if your daily subjective mood and energy is under a 6 to 7 out of 10 regularly, again, a sign that we're under recovered. So again, if mood's consistently under that 6 to 7, again, somewhere across the line, along the lines, I feel like our recovery needs to be improved, whether that's better food choices, whether that's better circadian rhythm, better stress management, again, a sign that we need to work on that. And then even your daily energy is under 6 to 7. If it's consistently under that, we need to look into that a bit more. Going to be key there. And then like persistent soreness, achy joints, heaviness, or sluggish training sessions, again, a sign that we're under recovered, and we would need to look at any of those things that I just talked about. One that I wanted to add in is female menstrual cycle. So if there's some irregularities, again, a sign your body's under stress and you're under recovered. And so we need to look into these things specifically, right? What is it for you? Really depends on the person, right? This is what I do with clients, right? Like I'm looking at what is the big bottleneck for you in terms of your recovery, because it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. Some people don't drink any alcohol. So it's like, hey, that's probably not the case. For some people, they have a high stress load on the body. Now, is that high stress load on the body coming from poor circadian rhythm? Is it coming from psychological stress? What is the I don't like to use the word root cause, but what is the thing that's causing that? Maybe it's like, hey, a simple thing you could do is more hydrations. So I think it's going to depend on the person and where they're at. And then again, even body composition is going to play a role in that. It's like, could your body comp be improved? That's a sign that let's take both ends of the spectrum here. Maybe somebody's super lean, they have high training load. Like again, for them, if they continue to eat in a low caloric state and they maintain the super low body fat levels, they might not have the energy and the mood as high as it could be. So it's like, then they need to be in that surplus to get their body weight up a little bit, right? But then you take someone who's high body fat levels, they might not feel good because they have higher body fat levels. So we need to be in that deficit to push them down. Obviously, with combination of these other things on this. So I think it really depends on the person and figuring out what out of this list are you or are they struggling with? And then that's where we need to that would be where my strategy would go towards. But in saying that, it's never a bad idea to, even if somebody is not feeling any of these things, to continue to push some of these things, right? Like watching your diet quality, watching your circadian rhythm, moderating your alcohol intake, managing your overall stress load, making sure you're moving enough, staying hydrated, right? Like you can put these in the bud early to make sure that we stay on top of it as well too. There. Hope this was helpful. Hopefully this gave you some insight into recovery, what to look for, some things you can work on, and then some actual metrics to look at to see if you are potentially under recovered there. So that's it for this episode. If you found it to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. And then if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_, and that's where I'm most active. And I'll talk to you guys soon.